Our journey throughout the generations is leading us to Gen Y, to the Millennials now. They're born between 1982 and 1999. They're the kids of the baby boomers, grew up in the 90s and early 2000s. Their parents sheltered them, which led to the criticism of just that parental generation that they are a mollycoddled generation. Go figure. Millennials weren't beaten as kids, they grew up in financial comfort. Their schedules were kept very busy during their childhood. They received top notch education at university, high rates of uni degrees, lots of second degrees here. They're the first truly digital generation. They grew up with computers everywhere. They napstered around on the early versions of the internet, and they had cell phones growing up. The first generation that grew up with cell phones. Smartphones only came when they were a bit older already. They grew up multitasking, therefore, constantly all those different mediums at hand, very difficult to stay focused. And it is this lack of focus that probably contributes to one of their biggest pain points, the tyranny of choice. You're wealthy, you're reasonably rich generation. The world's your oyster. Which degree should I study? Which career should I pursue? Millennials are ever unsure whether this really is the right path that they are on. They're obsessed with meaningful work. That will lead, of course, to positive things, since millennials will start businesses themselves. They're much more entrepreneurial than Gen Xers before them. So they'll start those wonderful businesses in order to create meaning, in order to completely reinvent the way or the goals of businesses. That's quite fascinating. It will also lead to millennials pushing their big corporate employers to double down on the corporate social corporate responsibility programs. Also great, but it will of course lead to what I call work image issues. It will lead to the millennial workforce just being constantly unsatisfied with the status quo of their jobs, because there must be more to life than creating Excel spreadsheets for their bosses. That said, this obsession with meaningful work, I would say, is probably going to subside a bit, is going to step into the background as the millennials are finally reaching the family formation stage of the life cycle. Then all of a sudden you have more pressing issues. The meaning of life doesn't need to come from work. It never came from religion, because it's a very atheistic generation. But so now the meaning of life doesn't need to come out of work anymore. You just grab the meaning of life, you pull this energy out of your own family, and you are then happy to provide financially to your family, and the meaning of life doesn't need to be linked to the job, which is a good thing anyways, because we can't perfectly match up 13 million jobs with 13 million individual passions. That's the numbers in Australia at the moment. So that doesn't work out. The big issue, of course, for the millennial generation, now that they are reaching the family formation stage, is housing. They want 3 to 4 bedroom homes because they need room bedrooms for 1.7 kids. They need a Zoom room, since many of those millennials are knowledge workers and work from home quite a bit. So they leave the inner cities of Melbourne, Sydney, Brisbane behind, and they move to wherever they can afford 3 to 4 bedroom homes. That means millennials leave the inner city. They go to suburbia. They go to the urban fringe. They go to regional Australia. That shift of the millennials out of the inner city into the rest of the country, really further away from the city centre, that will continue for at least one more decade. Big problem for millennials is that housing is freakishly expensive. Migration stopped, and still during the pandemic house prices go up. That is terribly confusing for millennials. They are rather bitter about this. Will anything be done in order to drive house prices down? I do not think so, to be honest. Anything, any politicians would would shed crocodile tears and say, "Yeah, we'll do something," but they come up with nonsensical themes or schemes like first home buyer grants. That's all nonsense. That just drives house prices further up. The meaningful ways of driving house prices down, nobody's willing to touch. Franking credits, negative gearing, Nobody touches those policies. There's no chance. Too many people are invested in this and will benefit from it. So what will millennials do? Well, they will need to move to wherever housing is more affordable. Regional Australia. We will need to seriously decentralize Australia, and the biggest generation in Australia, the millennials, will be driving this. Millennials are by now by far the largest tax-paying group, so therefore they are right to demand that infrastructure is being built in a way to actually benefit them over the coming decades. That will largely be focused, or must be focused, on improving the connectivity of the capital city to the regional hub. So we must see a major infrastructure project boom, which is budgeted for already. But will we actually do this? Are politicians willing enough to actually build infrastructure out into nowhere, into regional Australia, where there isn't that much population just yet, but that could drive population resettlements? Are local governments, are local towns willing to make more land available to accommodate millennials? That will decide how the millennials view their 2020s, how they view political parties, whether they see it as a lost decade. Well, some people might say, well, of course, some rich millennials already got a couple of gifts from the bank of mom and dad to allow them to enter the housing market. That's a phenomenon that we see at the top end of the economic ladder. Fair enough, that's happening there. The major wealth transfer in terms of just anyone inheriting whatever their parents owned, that is still 20 years away. Only as of 2041 will we see mass wealth transfer, or that's the peak mass wealth transfer year is 2041. So millennials need to find a way to afford housing in the next decade and a half, at the very least, on their own, without financial assistance from mom and dad. That said, housing will continue to be the millennial obsession. More in my column this week, and of course, please subscribe to this channel. Follow me on LinkedIn and on Twitter if you want more daily updates like this.